In 1944, a terrifying report reached the German High Command. Their scouts had spotted a massive American armored division moving toward the front lines. Thousands of tanks, heavy artillery trucks, a force powerful enough to crush anything in its path. The Nazi commanders panicked. They ordered their troops to retreat and prepare for a massive assault, but they didn't know the truth. That terrifying army, it didn't exist. If a German soldier had been brave enough to walk up to one of those tanks, he could have lifted it with one hand. Because the tanks were made of rubber, the cannons were made of wood, and the soldiers, they weren't commandos, they were artists, fashion designers, and sound engineers. This is the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, better known as the Ghost Army, the unit that defeated Hitler without firing a single bullet. Today, we're uncovering one of the most bizarre secrets of World War II. How a group of painters and actors used creativity as a weapon and staged the greatest magic show in military history. To understand this story, we have to go back to a desperate time. The US Army realized that brute force wasn't enough. They needed to outsmart the enemy. So they did something unheard of. They went to art schools in New York and Philadelphia. They went to ad agencies and theaters. They weren't looking for men with big muscles. They were looking for men with big imaginations. They recruited people like Bill Blass, who would later become a world-famous fashion designer, and Ellsworth Kelly, a legendary painter. Their mission was top secret. They were told, "You are going to Europe, and your job is to pretend." They formed the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit of just 1,100 men. So how do you fake an entire army? The Ghost Army developed a toolkit of deception that relied on three pillars: visual, sonic, and radio. First, the visuals. They created the inflatable tank. From a few hundred yards away, these rubber M4 Shermans looked perfectly real. They even painted them to look battle-worn. But they ran into a problem. Real tanks leave deep, heavy tracks in the mud. Rubber tanks do not. So these artists, being creative problem solvers, used bulldozers to carve fake tank tracks into the ground, leading right up to the rubber tanks. When German spy planes flew over, they saw the tanks and the tracks, and their intelligence reports confirmed the threat was real. But perhaps the scariest weapon they had was sound. Visuals weren't enough. An army is incredibly loud. So the Unit AS sound engineers went to Fort Knox and recorded the specific sounds of armored infantry divisions on the move. They built massive 500-pound speakers and mounted them on half-tracks. These speakers were so powerful, they could project the sound of a moving army up to 15 miles away. Imagine being a German soldier on the front lines at night. It's pitch black. Suddenly, you hear the unmistakable roar of engines, the clanking of steel, and the muffled shouts of sergeants giving orders. You call for reinforcements, absolutely terrified of an impending attack. But out there in the dark, there's nothing but two trucks and a few artists playing a record. The deception went even deeper. This was the ultimate method acting. The Ghost Army soldiers would deliberately go into French towns where they knew Nazi spies were hiding. They would wear the patches of real divisions, sometimes the 75th, sometimes the 90th. They'd sit in cafes, order wine, and loudly whisper about their big plans.
Hey, the general says we move east tomorrow morning.
They knew the spies were listening. The spies would then run back to report this vital intel, and the German army would move its forces east to intercept them, leaving the west wide open for the real American army to advance. But this was incredibly dangerous work. Often the Germans would fire artillery at the ghost positions. The artists had to stay in their inflatable camps while live shells exploded around them. They watched shrapnel tear right through their tents. And if a shell happened to hit one of their rubber tanks, it wouldn't explode. It would deflate with a sad hissing sound. If that happened in daylight, the entire game was over. Their greatest performance came near the end of the war, during a mission called Operation Viersen. It was March of 1945. The Allies needed to cross the Rhine River into Germany. This was the final, critical push. The Ghost Army was ordered to distract the Germans. They set up a massive fake army south of the actual crossing point. They deployed over 600 inflatable tanks and vehicles. They played their sound effects at maximum volume all night long. They flooded the radio waves with fake orders and chatter. And it worked perfectly. The German commanders were completely convinced the main attack was coming from the south. They moved their best tank divisions to meet the Ghosts. Meanwhile, miles to the north, the real Allied forces crossed the river with almost no resistance. The Ghost Army had literally opened the door to Germany. When the war ended, the men of the Ghost Army went home, but they couldn't tell anyone what they did. Their mission was classified top secret. For decades, their wives and children thought they were just clerks or truck drivers. It wasn't until 1996, more than 50 years later, that the files were declassified and their incredible story came to light. Historians estimate that the Ghost Army saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives. They proved that in the chaos of war, the mind is sharper than the sword. They painted tanks, acted like generals, and used sound as a shield. They were the army that never existed, but the lives they saved were very, very real. So I have a question for you. If you were in WW2, would you rather drive a real tank or be part of the Ghost Army? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more mysteries from history. Thanks for watching.